Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're tackling a truly ancient whodunit, the early evolution of bacteria on Earth.
Right.
You sent us this compelling research article from Science, and it was also nicely covered by the conversation. It details how scientists are using some, well, seriously clever approaches to piece together this multi-billion-year-old story.
Yeah. And the findings are pretty surprising.
Let's just say they're turning some long-held assumptions on their head.
Absolutely. For the longest time, trying to understand how early bacteria evolved has felt like, trying to read the first chapters of life's history, but most of the pages are just missing. The relatively simple structure being single-celled organisms and the lack of traditional fossils like you get with bigger life forms, it's really kept us in the dark about huge chunks of their development.
Okay, let's unpack this incredible starting point the article mentions. Roughly 1 trillion species of bacteria.
Yeah.
The sheer scale of that number is just mind-blowing. It really puts into perspective that the vast majority of life, individual organisms anyway, is microbial.
It does. And they aren't just numerous, they're incredibly diverse. They drive nutrient cycles, break down waste, they even influence climate. They're kind of the unsung heroes of our ecosystems.
And for the first, 80% of life's history, Earth was just bacteria.
Pretty much exclusively a bacterial world. Yeah. They are the original inhabitants, and they've fundamentally shaped the planet we live on today in ways we're, frankly, still discovering.
Which leads us straight to that fundamental challenge, doesn't it?
Yeah.
How do you study the evolution of organisms that don't leave behind easy-to-spot fossils?
Exactly.
The article mentions comparing DNA sequences. We do that all the time, right? To see how different life forms are related. And it uses that great analogy. Humans are more closely related to mushrooms than to apple trees.
That's a really helpful way to visualize it. Comparing DNA, the genetic code, is absolutely essential for building the tree of life. It lets us see how different organisms, including all those bacteria, are related.
Okay.
We can sort of figure out who branched off from whom and in what relative order, you know.
But, as the article points out, DNA comparisons alone, they don't give us a concrete timeline. No dates.
Precisely.
Knowing humans and mushrooms are closer relatives than humans and apple trees doesn't tell us when in actual years those splits happen.
Exactly. That's where major geological events become crucial. They act like timestamps in life's history. And the article really zeroes in on one of the biggest, the Great Oxidation Event, GOE, happened around 2.4 billion years ago.
Right, a true turning point.
Definitely.
So the GOE, this is when cyanobacteria, these early bacteria, basically figured out photosynthesis, using sunlight for energy.
Yep.
And oxygen was this inconvenient waste product, as the article delightfully puts it. Hard to think of oxygen as inconvenient now.
Well, what's fascinating is the sheer power of this waste. Before the GOE, Earth's atmosphere had practically zero free oxygen.
Wow.
And for most life back then, oxygen was actually toxic, poisonous. Yeah. So the rise of oxygen basically triggered a massive extinction event. It completely reshaped the biosphere. It's kind of humbling to think that something we need to live today was once deadly.
Talk about a planet-altering innovation with some serious side effects. But then, life being, adaptable, some bacteria found ways not just to survive this new oxygen-rich world, but to thrive.
Right. They either evolved the ability to use oxygen in their metabolism,
Oh, okay.
or, as the article notes, they kind of retreated to the remaining oxygen-free pockets on the planet.
Gotcha.
And this is where the GOE becomes that crucial fossil marker the researchers talk about.
Oh, okay.
Because we have a pretty solid date for when the atmosphere got significantly oxygenated, we know that any bacteria using oxygen must have evolved that ability after this event. It gives us a really important anchor point for building that timeline.
Okay, I follow the logic. We know roughly when oxygen became common, and oxygen-using bacteria had to show up in response. But how do you go from that to pinpointing when specific abilities emerged, especially ones that might even predate the GOE? That's where the AI comes in, right?
This is where it gets really interesting. Yeah. The researchers trained an artificial intelligence model. They fed it genes from modern bacteria and taught it to predict whether they use oxygen or not.
So, like teaching the AI to spot the genetic signature for oxygen user.
Exactly. Think of it like that, because using oxygen, or not using it, leaves a significant imprint all over a bacterium's genome. The whole machinery is different.
That makes perfect sense. If you're using oxygen for energy, your fundamental cellular setup is going to be different from something living without it.
Right.
Those differences have to be in the genes.
Precisely. The AI learned to spot these subtle patterns and correlations in the genetic data. And once they had a well-trained model, Well, then they could apply it to the past.
Okay, hang on. How do you apply AI to the past? That sounds a bit sci-fi.
Huh. Well, modern techniques in genomics, studying the whole set of genes, let scientists reconstruct the genomes of ancestral bacteria.
Reconstruct? How?
Basically, by comparing the genes of lots of related modern bacteria and using complex algorithms to statistically work out the most likely genetic sequence of their shared ancestor.
Oh, okay.
So the researchers took these reconstructed ancestral genomes, representing bacteria from different points in evolutionary history, and fed them into their oxygen-predicting AI model.
So the AI could then look at the genetic blueprint of these long-gone bacteria and basically say, based on these genes, this ancient critter likely could or couldn't use oxygen.
Exactly. And by doing that across many different branches of the bacterial tree of life, they could start piecing together a timeline for when the ability to use oxygen probably evolved in different lineages.
Here's the kicker, isn't it? The article reveals this really surprising discovery.
Ah.
Some bacterial lineages seem to have had the ability to use oxygen roughly 900 million years before the Great Oxidation Event.
Yeah, almost 1 billion years.
Before the atmosphere had any significant oxygen. How is that even possible?
This is the evolutionary head scratcher, like you said. It's revolutionary because it suggests that the basic biochemical machinery for respiration might have evolved for a different reason first.
Like what?
Maybe dealing with tiny trace amounts of oxygen produced locally? Or perhaps it even played a role in other metabolic processes we haven't thought of. It really forces us to rethink the selective pressures on early Earth.
So these bacteria weren't, breathing in an oxygen-rich atmosphere, maybe just interacting with tiny little pockets of it.
Possibly.
Or maybe the ability to use oxygen evolved for something else entirely, and it only got repurposed kind of after the GOE when oxygen became widespread. What advantage would it give if there wasn't much oxygen?
Those are exactly the questions this raises. It fundamentally challenges our timeline of how life adapted to oxygen. But wait, there's another twist. Another remarkable, kind of paradoxical finding about the cyanobacteria themselves.
Oh, yeah. The article mentions something about them having the ability to use oxygen even before they developed photosynthesis, the very process that flooded the planet with it.
And that's weird.
It is. It suggests this fascinating counterintuitive sequence. Maybe early cyanobacteria had some kind of basic biochemical toolkit that let them handle or maybe even use tiny amounts of oxygen for some other process.
Huh.
And this pre-existing machinery could have then become absolutely critical later when they evolved photosynthesis and suddenly had to deal with all the oxygen they were making.
It's like they had the basic tools in the toolbox before they even built the machine that needed those tools.
That's a fantastic analogy, yeah. It really highlights how evolution can be so opportunistic, repurposing existing stuff for new functions when the environment changes.
Absolutely. And connecting this back to the big picture, this research just underscores that intricate dance between life evolving and the planet's environment changing. Totally. Biological innovations change the environment, and environmental shifts drive more biological evolution. The whole long, complex story of oxygen on Earth is a perfect example of this coevolution.
So let's recap our deep dive. Thanks to AI looking at reconstructed ancient genes, we've learned some bacteria could use oxygen way, way earlier than we thought. Hundreds of millions of years before the GOE, before Earth had much oxygen, and maybe even before cyanobacteria really got photosynthesis going strong.
That's a great summary. The real aha moment for me, and hopefully for our listeners too, is just realizing how much more complex and surprising the timeline of early life is.
Yeah.
Bacteria were developing these crucial survival tools in what seems like a very unexpected order, probably responding to conditions wildly different from today.
It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? If some bacteria evolved to use something as scarce as oxygen was back then, what other fundamental biological abilities might have popped up in equally surprising contexts early on? What other inconvenient waste products might have accidentally shaped the entire course of evolution? It's a truly provocative thought. Thanks so much for taking this deep dive with me.
My pleasure. Fascinating stuff.